purpose robot. Maybe you need to invest more time doing the R&D in terms of the ML layer, the computer vision layer, in order to adapt that.
Are fun. Like, oh,
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
is spying on me. So I feel that it's very interesting to think about that when companies are trying to say, oh, they're going to be companions, they're going to be helping you, that sometimes they haven't realized the challenges of coming into a culture. And then on
Yeah.
top of that, like you say, that
A
Yes.
lot of there's a lot of
The complete body of the robot. But also there is another entry point that is really interesting for me, that is basically that we can, right? Or maybe servo motors could be another option, right? Because they are basically the low level hardware components in the supply chain that could be attacked by a malware, right? Like the lidar sensor, the cameras, for example, right? So yeah, I see these two.
Welcome to Robo Success, the podcast that loves robots, marketing, and success. Here we spotlight the innovators building the future of robotics. Hit subscribe, share with a friend, and let's get started.
Hello, welcome to the Robo Success Podcast. Today I am super excited. How are you, Andy?
I am doing great. We have another awesome guest today, and I'm really excited for this one.
Yes, today I have a person that I have been chasing for too long because I know is super busy. Aldo
Totally.
Luevano. He is the chairman and co-founder of Roomie IT. But the most important thing I have to highlight today, he is Mexican. So he is one of my favorites, of course. So thank you, Aldo, for being here.
No, thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm really excited to talk about Rumi, obviously, because as you know, Rumi is a pioneer in robotics in Latin America, and happy to share the insights, the thoughts that we have related to robotics deployment, not only in Mexico. Actually, I think that is a huge opportunity in the States to deploy Mexican robots. So thanks for having me, and I'm gonna enjoy this conversation a lot with you guys.
Yes, I'm pretty sure about that. So
Perfect.
thank you, Aldo. So let's dive in about you, your background. Tell us a little bit about you so the audience can get to know you more.
Sure. Well, actually, I'm a cybernetics engineer. I study in La Salle University in Mexico City. Long time ago, I have been developing robotics, artificial intelligence, and enterprise software for the last 16 years. So the first 10 years of my professional career, I work in the corporate world. I work in ABM, in HP, TCS, some big tech companies. And at some point, I decided to create my own venture, right? Because I found that the corporate world was not for me. So I started my own business, Rumi. And it's funny because at the beginning, Rumi was a robotics company for consumer market, right? Our initial use case was a robot that can be a companion, an assistant in household. But then we realized that it was really impossible, really complicated to deploy a robot like that for Mexican families, because you know that Mexico at the end of the day is a developing country, right? So it's complicated to pay the bills. Or now imagine an assistant robot, so it's gonna be impossible, right? So at that point we decided to pivot our business model to become a B2B startup. So we started deploying robots for companies in retail sector, banking, hospitality, public sector. And at some point also we decided to increase our portfolio of solutions to the AI space. I mean, pure AI software, let's say, right? Deploying use cases around machine learning, computer vision, natural language processing, because as you know, if you want to have a robot that can interact with people, you need to deploy several machine learning models like computer vision, deep learning, different things in order to enable the interaction by voice. You know, the robot needs to see people, identify abnormal patterns, avoid obstacles, for example. At the end of the day, all these ML models are specific use cases that you can use in the software space, right? So yeah, we decided to extend our portfolio and we started selling solutions for big companies in different sectors. And right now, part of our income is from robotics, let's say just 10% of our income, but the other 90% of Rumi's income is from AI put software in the enterprise AI space.
That's awesome. So where are you seeing the most traction on AI for that piece of it? Where are your big markets that you're seeing that growth?
Well, talking about AI, there are a lot of use cases, right? But
Yeah.
we are achieving a very strong product market fit in one specific use case, that is legacy migration. You know that in
Mhm.
organizations, there are a lot of old systems, big dinosaurs are being doing a lot of headaches for the company in the last years, right? So the thing with this, all these legacy systems, that they are processing millions of transactions every single day is crazy, right? So with AI now, with generative AI, you can migrate all the legacy stuff to the latest technology, to new architectures. So this is a powerful use case that we are commercializing right now. But it's important to say that we continue doing research and development in robotics, because I think that eventually robotics is going to be a huge space for Rumi. And basically because we have a huge opportunity using the corridor, right? You know that Mexico can use all the trades that we have with United States and Canada in order to supply robots in a lower cost, for example. That's one of our theses. For this reason, we are still developing robots. We are exploring different use cases in the humanoid space, right? But it's important to say that the majority of the investment to this R&D area comes from the profits of Rumi in the AI space, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of, I mean, humanoids, there's a lot of research and development going on. So you have lived some of this, right? Starting with the robotics platform, and it sounds like you've branched out into some of the AI. What do you see as the biggest gap to real world deployment for humanoid robotics?
Well, I think that the main challenge is to identify the ROI, right? Because, for example, if you think in a use case for Latin America, it's really complicated because the price of the workforce, right, the human labor, right, is really cheap. If you compare Latin America countries with United States, so it's really difficult to show a real ROI for the business case, right? So this is one of the challenges. Obviously, I believe that the opportunity for Mexico is to commercialize robots to the United States, right? That is the biggest market in the world. Obviously, there are other kind of challenges, right? That, for example, in terms of cybersecurity, you know, in high regulated companies, high regulated industries, it's really complicated to use, for example, Chinese robots, right? Or foreign robots, foreigner. So this is one of the challenges, all the compliance that you need to have in order to deploy humanoids in internal processes, right? And also another one could be the cost associated with the R&D, right? Because at the end of the day, when you are defining a specific use case, you need to tailor make the solutions for the specific needs of the organization, right? So you have a general purpose robot, maybe you need to invest more time doing the R&D in terms of the ML layer, the computer vision layer, in order to adapt that specific use case to an internal process, right? So there are some challenges associated, but I think that these are the main challenges that we are facing right now.
yeah. And you have touched a very interesting point that I think a lot of people sometimes doesn't realize the difference between cultures, right? I'm very immersed in the humanoids industry right now. And we keep hearing, right, the humanoids are coming to be helping at home. I think it's one of the
Correct.
biggest pushes. But what happened, like you say, when culturally, right, is even hard sometimes. Like here in Mexico, it's very easy to have a person that come and help
Correct.
clean your house for a couple dollars, right? We put that in money in dollars. So what happened when you have technology, how people can trust, right? My mom, for instance, sometimes don't even trust her phone. Like, oh,
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
is spying on me. So I feel that it's very interesting to think about that when companies are trying to say, oh, now, right, we're going to be deploying humanoids everywhere, they're going to be companions, they're going to be helping you, that sometimes they haven't realized the challenges of coming into a culture. And then on
Yeah.
top of that, like you say, that what are the safety regulations that are behind and how you can
Correct.
keep it safe. So I think I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to be looking in a few years? What a truly commodity humanoid is going to look like? What are we talking about on that sense?
Well, actually, it's a very good question, because I see that eventually in the near future, robots are going to be commodities, right? Like a cell phone or a computer, right? Because a lot of companies are developing humanoids right now, mainly Chinese companies. So I think that it's going to be mid-market layer. These companies are selling millions of dollars, but they cannot pay for the latest technology, because the SP500 companies are going to pay for Tesla robots, for Figure, for Aptronic, for example, right? All these companies that are in mid-market are going to pay for lower cost robots, right? But with a high quality, right? That is also important. So I think that in this commodity world, there is an opportunity for Mexican robots, because normally you can think that Chinese robots are gonna, be deployed in this mid-market layer, but the reality is that it's gonna be so complicated for the compliance issues, right? You know that we have the situation with cloud computing, right? It's so complicated to use an external cloud provider like Alibaba Cloud or Huawei Cloud in a organization in the enterprise, right? So I think that is going to be something similar in this commodity world, right? Organizations in the United States are not going to be open to use Chinese technology for all these compliance issues. And that's why I see this opportunity for Mexican robots. If we can have OEMs in the north of the country, basically we can commercialize the solutions in a North America compliance way, right? And it's an opportunity for the Mexican market. Obviously, the challenge in this point is to have a strong R&D, because normally in Mexico and Latin America we don't have a strong VC industry interested in investing in robotics and deep tech startups, right? Normally the VC investors in Mexico and in all Latin America are investing more in the fintech side, e-commerce, marketplaces, all these kind of problems that are happening in the developing countries, right? But the reality is that also we need to find the best way maybe to get resources from the government, for example, in order to invest in more R&D localized in Mexico and other innovation hubs, maybe Brazil, right? Because there is a huge opportunity to commercialize these robots in the market, right? But this in the near future. I think I see this commoditized world maybe in 2035, something like that, in 10 years. Because right now the problem is the offer and demand, right? We don't have a strong demand of robots. There are not a lot of companies asking for robots in the market. So I know that Chinese companies wanna win the race. That's the main reason, because they are developing robots as crazy. But the reality is that there are not a huge demand of robots right now. So for Mexican companies, I think that we need to wait a little bit more, invest in R&D to be ready to prepare our R&D capabilities, and eventually commercialize all these robots to the corridor.
And you touched on something that I think is important, whether you look at it from a security standpoint or compliance standpoint or a political standpoint.
Yes.
A lot of there's a lot of humanoid technology coming out of China, and even the US based research and development that's happening. There's a lot of Chinese components, a lot of Chinese content still in those platforms. So once we get through this R&D phase and we get into manufacturing, Mexico has a long history of manufacturing, right? There's a lot of good manufacturing there. Where do you see Mexico fitting into the humanoid robotics in that supply chain and that value chain?
Well, actually, I have two ideas, right? And I don't have a crystal ball to define the right strategy, But first of all, I think that we can develop and integrate the full body of the robot, right? The full robot. That is a possibility, because we have experience in similar industries, like in automotive, for example, electronic, right? So So at the end of the day, there is an opportunity, there is an entry point for Mexico, developing or ensembling the complete body of the robot, But also there is another entry point that is really interesting for me. That is basically that we can create actuators, right? Or maybe servo motors could be another option, right? Because they are basically the low-level hardware components in the supply chain, right? So if we can create this technology, hardware components without any Chinese malware or software layer, you know what I mean? For sure it's going to be attractive for the market, right? Because we are getting value from another part of the value chain. So we have to explore. To be honest, in Roomie, we are more in the robotics R&D side, right? I feel more excited to create the complete body of the robot, to do a strong tests in the walking capability of the robot. But there is a huge business opportunity also in the actuators and servo motor side, right? And all the components that could be attacked by a malware, right? Like the LiDAR sensor, the cameras, for example, right? So yeah, I see these two entry points, but also it's important to explore which is going to be the best way to commercialize the solution, right? For example, thinking about the first approach, if a Mexican company, and I'm saying Roomie could be another Mexican company, create a competitive advantage developing robots in Mexico, in the north of the country, and exporting that robots to United States, maybe could be replicated by Tesla or Aptronic or Figure, because they are going to see that it's a best way to reduce costs, right? So I think that for this first approach, we need to find defensibility in the value proposition. And I see that it's more complicated in the second approach, because for them, right? Because they are not going to be aware of the low level components, right? The real IP of Figure and Tesla and all these big names are in the complete body, right? In the complete cognitive capability of the robot, not in the low level hardware component itself, right? So yeah, I think that is more defensible, the second approach. But at the end of the day, we need to find a way to have compliance with United States developing the low-level hardware components.
Yeah, no, 100% agree on that. And I think like sometimes I see that it's still, all these companies hasn't realized all the potential of Latin America and especially the closeness with Mexico. So you have been working here more than me in that area. Have you faced any challenges, right, in how to partner your company with companies here in the US?
Well, actually, I think that the main challenge is not in the partnering itself. I think that is more related to the investment, right? As I told you, I believe that in order to have a differentiator in Mexico, to have a competitive advantage, first of all, you need to have the strong IP, right? That's the first step. And you cannot compete against Figure with 2 billion seed round investment. That's crazy, right? It's really complicated. So the problem, the threshold is like investors in Latin America are not interested to invest in robotics startups and these kind of ventures. So this is the first thing. Obviously, you can find design partners, for example. That is a kind of traction. For example, in the second approach, to sell or to develop low-level hardware components to the robotics big names in United States. I think that the best way to do is to create a partnership, as you said, basically to find a design partner, right? That's a concept, and basically you can show traction to investors, not only in Mexico. I think that for these kind of ventures, you need to talk with investors in Silicon Valley, in Boston, that they are looking these big opportunities globally, right? Not in a localized manner. Correct.
Yeah, I 100% agree on that. So, because I always have said, like in the humanoids or in general in robotics, right? You have a lot of components, like you say, you are building hardware, you're building software, right? But on top of that, you need also the money of the investment that is helping to keep pushing away, right? So you need an ecosystem to drive around to scale. And
Correct.
I feel that what Mexico can offer is a lot of help with that escalation, especially now that a lot of things are happening political in changing who partner with who, right? Mexico could play a big role in this ecosystem, but need to be happening also from the government, right? Now government need also to be interested in how to keep pushing for that, for those partnerships, not only at business level, but also between governments to be a little more open
Correct.
on this. So what are the biggest gaps that you see, between R&D, real world deployment, and emerging, all these ecosystems, right? Between, okay, now we have the R&D, now, we need to go to real world deployment. What are the gaps that you are seeing there?
Well, that is a good question. Also, I think that talking about robotics, a main disadvantage is that it's not software, right? And normally software is asset light. So when you are developing a new use case, because humanoid robotics is something new, is the next big thing. I believe that is for sure rocket science. So when you're developing something new, you need to get customer feedback as soon as possible. That's the secret sauce, well, to have a great product. You know what I mean? So it's really complicated to get this feedback when you fail or you find a bug or an error, an issue, something that is going to happen in the development process, but you don't have the speed, the velocity to change that error, right? To respond to that situation, right? So this is the main challenge. When you are developing software, you can fix the error just in a couple of seconds, and out with AI, the price of software is really cheap. So you can test very fast and be sure that you are creating an amazing product, right? You can iterate very fast and get this feedback from the final user in a faster manner, right? But with robotics is different because we are talking about hardware. So if something happened, then you need to have an inventory of pieces and replace that specific piece and program again the component and check if everything is working right now. So it's more complicated. The R&D process is more complicated. On the other hand, obviously is capital intensive, right? That's why it's complicated to create this kind of ventures, because you need to ask for more money since the beginning, since the seed round, right? So these two are the main challenges, I think so, right? Like, this gap is related to the speed that you can achieve to prove that you have a strong product that can solve any specific pain in the organization. This is the main gap that I'm seeing, and you need to have two resources: an amazing team, the best talent possible, and money in order to to have deep pockets for inventory, to hire the team, also to do the R&D. So yeah, I think that these are the two main gaps to develop real use cases for the world.
Yeah, so Aldo, I'm a hardware engineer and I've been designing hardware for 20 years, and I always make fun of the software guys because they can make a mistake and you just hit the recompile button. When you're building hardware, it's a little bit harder than that.
Yeah,
So, when we look at we talked a little bit about Mexico and developing some of those components and the piece parts and that low level hardware to support the robotics and the humanoid industry in general.
correct.
What do you think the timeline looks like? What's the trigger for, do you think it's time now to invest in that in Latin America to build up those capabilities, or what's the trigger? Because we're still, we've been kind of dancing around this. Well, there's a lot of research and development. We haven't seen large scale deployments of humanoids. At the same time, there are a lot of robotics technologies that are growing very quickly in the US. So what's the trigger? What do you feel is the right time for Mexico's investment in some of those low-level hardware components?
I think that this is the right moment to do it, right? Because I believe that we are not talking about a race, no, to win the first place with the best robot possible. That's not true, right? For sure, we are gonna have a commoditized world in the short term. Robots are gonna be commodities, and we're gonna have different prices, different models, different solutions, specific robots for general purpose and specific purpose robots, right? So So based on that, I believe that is the right moment in order to support the R&D capabilities of Mexican robotics companies. We have just a few companies, right? But there is a huge potential. And you know what? I think that is not only in the supply chain side, also in the R&D side, because Mexico have been won several competitions of robotics around all the world. The RoboCup, we won other important competitions. Right? We are really good engineers in robotics. The problem is that we don't have an industry in Mexico and Latin America, right? It's really complicated for engineers to finish university and start working in a Mexican company of robotics. That is impossible right now. So they are looking to migrate to another country, right, in order to continue doing research or in order to work in a real world application of robotics. But we are really good in R&D, right? So I believe that is the right moment because we can strengthen this capability and also use the advantage that we have because we are the nearest neighbor of United States and we can use all the trades. We have the lowest tariffs, right? That it's funny for all the stuff that we know in the news, but the reality is that we have very good tariffs to commercialize the robot. So if you compare the price of a Chinese robot, maybe we are not going to have exactly the same price, right? We are going to be more expensive. But if you consider all the reselling layers, the tariffs, the local maintenance, all these fees that you need to sum in order to have the final price of the robot, for sure we can have an equal price, right? If you compare with Chinese technology. The problem is that right now, I think that government and investors are not looking to win this race, right? So that's the problem. But again, I totally agree with you that this is the right moment to invest in Mexican companies because there is a huge opportunity when we need to find this defensibility. And we have some advantages. We have the skills. We have the previous experience in similar industries. So we can do it for sure, right?
Yes. And well, of course, I can say that as a Mexican, right? I know the talent. I know, like you say, we have a lot of the components to make it happen. And I think this is where it's my next question because you and I were born and raised in Mexico, right? We
Yeah.
went to school to Mexico, but then now we moved to the US, which I think I don't know if you have had this experience. I'm pretty sure you have. Also, you are in a MIT right now, where you are surrounded by many entrepreneurs and other talents that you have the resources that probably before you didn't have in Mexico.
Correct.
Plus, also you have going through experience as an entrepreneur in Mexico and now being here in the US that there are a big difference how business happen. And it's not just about money, it's one of them, like you say, right? It's easy to get investment here and people believe in the technology. But I think it's also about what is in the back end of helping the ecosystem, the mindset that also changed, right? Like the way I was thinking before versus how I think now that I moved to the US has been changing a lot. And I think
Yeah.
that also make a big impact on how we are creating companies in Mexico, the technology, right? So what has been your experience, right, as an immigrant moving from Mexico now living in the US, how that has been changing the shaping of your entrepreneur mindset?
Yeah, obviously, I think that MIT changed my mind for sure, right? Because I I had previous experience developing tech business in Mexico, and guys, that I have a profitable organization, I have a profitable company, right? But it's not the same when you are thinking in a global deployment for sure, right? So I think that right now I am pushing myself to do more innovation driven entrepreneurship, right? It's a different kind of entrepreneurship because you are not looking just for profits or to get profitability in your current company locally. You are looking to create technology that can change the world, right? And personally, I feel excited about this ideology, right? So it's not just to make money because I believe that Rumi has a long path in Latin America, not only in Mexico. We are deploying new commercial offices in Colombia, Peru, Chile. We have an amazing product that is solving a huge pain point for Latin American companies, and we can make a lot of money, right? But eventually, to be honest, I prefer to create something for the whole world, right? That's the idea, right? And also, it's important to clarify that I believe that as a Mexican entrepreneur, I need to leverage my connections in Mexico, right? I'm trying to find these advantages that, for example, the location, the low cost of human labor in Mexico and other countries, the connections, the low tariffs, all these are advantages that we can use as Mexican entrepreneurs in order to accelerate robotics deployment in US, right? Also, in my case, in my personal case, I would like to wait a little more. I think that it's important to hold on because things are moving so fast in physical AI, right? So maybe you can have a plan, and if you execute bad this plan, maybe, I don't know, a hyperscaler can replicate your capability or your functionality. You are done, right? So it's important to wait and find this entry point, this strong entry point. At some point, maybe I'm gonna start doing robotics. You know, in a different way, right? But it's important to wait a little bit more for a Mexican company. I think that is not right now the right moment to commercialize. Is the right moment to do R&D, to find this differentiator, to get customer feedback, to identify these potential use cases, because I think that in this moment the value proposition of a general purpose robot is not the best way, right, to tackle this market, this industry, right? You need to find specific use cases to deliver value, and in order to do that, you need to know the business of your customers, right? You need to understand their pain points. You need to get feedback as soon as possible, as I told you. So I believe that is more in that path. In our case, in Roomie, we need to wait a little bit more in order to find these entry points or these potential entry points to the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I always focus on, and I love that you keep mentioning it a couple of times, is the customer feedback, right? You can have
Correct.
the most amazing idea and think like you are gonna solve the world problems, but without hearing what your customer really needs or is asking for, then you don't have a product that is gonna be, that is gonna offer value. Although
Correct.
sometimes, really when it's a totally new market, sometimes the customer really doesn't know what they need, but they still need to be, you still need to be collecting some kind of data to understand
Correct.
if your idea really makes sense. Because like you were mentioning at the beginning, right? Oh, we thought like Mexicans would like a companion robot and so on. And then you realize, oh, that is not the right moment now. Now
Correct.
things keep changing, and who knows, right? In 5 years, we see things totally different. We saw now in the World Cup that they were humanoids, right, doing security around the games and
Correct.
so on. Things that before I never thought I will see it, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Correct.
it has been a big change. I agree with what you say, right? Wait until you know what is a clear path on what is next. So thank you so much for that insight, Aldo. And we are getting to the end of the podcast. And this has been amazing. I think you really touch a very interesting topic. Of course, a lot of people doesn't realize what is the status of Latin America and Mexico in the robotics. So thank you so much for sharing that. Uh, well, tell us how people can, get in contact with you, get to know more about Rumi.
For sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me, for having me in your podcast. Actually, I think that robotics space is changing so fast, right? So I remember 5 years ago, we were working in AMRs, AGVs, right? Autonomous robots. And right now, all companies are pivoting to humanoid space and walking robots and bipedal, right? So we need to find the competitive advantage. Again, I think this is the most important part for a venture to be successful, right? Um, and yeah, personally, I'm really excited about robotics. We are gonna keep developing robots. Again, not in a strong manner commercializing the robots. I think that is not the right moment for Rumi. Yeah, but eventually we are gonna find the best way to commercialize not only in Mexico, globally, right? That's the idea. And you can find me obviously on LinkedIn. I'm a strong LinkedIn user. right? I'm trying to post about different topics, not just about robotics, but also, well, actually, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. Normally, I'm like Aldo Luevano is my name. And you can find Roomie in roomieIT.com. That is our website. And you're going to find a lot of information about our AI services, portfolio solutions, and obviously robotics that we are keeping developing these kind of solutions. And we are happy to stay in touch and talk with you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Aldo. Thank you, Andy, for being here. This was an amazing conversation, guys.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Aldo.
Thank you, Andy.